Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us for MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. It's primary election time in Detroit, and there has been no shortage of bizarre surprises and twists this season. And though the city has filed for bankruptcy, an emergency manager is in charge, that doesn't mean that these positions are powerless. This is arguably one of the most important elections for the future of Detroit. Let's get started tonight here in our Midtown studios with our MiWeek contributors and the editorial page editors of the Detroit News and Detroit Free Press, Nolan Stephen and Stephen Henderson. Gentlemen, it's good to see you.
Good to be here.
All right, so we're a couple days before the
5
primary.
days.
Finally,
6
we have finally arrived at this point. So, where are we in the mayoral election? You guys both moderated a large candidate forum.
We're trying to forget that, Christy.
All 13 of them on the stage, which I think is very ambitious anyway, to have that many people to try to get, statements out of them that voters can really, hang on to and use in their decision-making process. But where are we in this race? Does it still come down to Benny Napoleon and write-in candidate Mike Duggan?
That's what the polls would suggest. I mean, the latest polling out shows it about dead even between the two of them. It's where it's been. The question is, will that translate to people actually going into the polling booth and remembering how to vote for Mike Duggan? I think if his name were on the ballot, it would be no question. Those two would be the two who would get on the November ballot. But it's still a big question mark. Will people remember how to do it?
Has he done enough to educate the public?
Well, no, you can never do enough. There's going to be people who screw it up, who spell his name wrong or forget to do it quite the right way. And the question will, the circle, you've got to darken the circle next to the write-in line too. So it's going to come down to whether the Board of Canvassers and the clerk can work out which votes he gets out of the write-ins and which ones he doesn't. Just like any election, though, this comes down to turnout. Can Mike Duggan turn out the people who were going to vote for him anyway, and make sure they do the right thing? I don't know. I mean, people keep asking me who you think is going to win, and I keep saying, well, you tell me who's going to vote, and then I can tell you who I think is going to win.
One of the things we've got to take a look at is how well he did with his absentee ballot voters, because that's a little different. I mean, you can help,
coach
if
them,
you will.
yeah.
I mean, you can't
Well,
really
you're
help
also
them
sitting
fill
down
out
at
the
your
ballot,
house, and
but
take a
you
little
can,
time.
You can make sure that people have a little more time. You give them an instruction sheet, what have you. And I don't know what the absentee ballot, how large a vote it is.
Well, it's a big chunk of the vote in Detroit always, because you got so many seniors, and they automatically are eligible for
Has
that.
anybody polled that?
I saw some information this week that suggested the absentee ballots weighted much more heavily toward Mike Duggan than I would have suspected. Now, no one would show me the actual poll, no one would tell me what the methodology was, but it was a significant sample, and he had a vast majority of the votes, way more than Benny Napoleon. So if that holds and turns out to be the way it happened on election day, that could be huge.
They're talking about turnout about 12 to 15%, which is so
That's
small.
low. And you would think that would benefit Mike Duggan if he's got a good ground game and is getting his people out. The other thing that helps him out is the field behind those two is extraordinarily weak. I'm not sure any of them can clear the 10% mark. Do you?
No, I think if you had stronger other candidates, he'd be in more trouble, just like Nolan said. But you've got sort of assembly of clowns, but between the rest of them, and they're not going to siphon enough votes from anybody to make much of a difference.
And in the polls I saw this week, Tom Barrow was in third place in both of them, and still way behind. I'm not sure the lunatic fringe is large enough in terms of the 12-15% turnout to put Tom Barrow on the ballot. So that works in Duggan's favor.
Yeah, I think.
Were you surprised by some of the comments that some of the candidates were making earlier this week during your forum, that it's still an us versus them, like if they become mayor?
There's a lot of people in the city who feel that way. I have always maintained that's not the majority, and I think that we have a lot of evidence that that's not the majority. If you go back 4 years, when we had this election before, we had 4 elections in 1 year because of all the craziness. Look at who won those elections. Dave Bing won 4 times, first against Ken Cockrell, who was a very good candidate, and then against Tom Barrow. I think if you can sort of project that forward to now and assume that the electorate hasn't changed that much, the majority of the city doesn't believe that stuff. But you do have a political class in Detroit that feeds it and feeds off of it.
If it's true, and I believe you're right, I think the majority of Detroit doesn't feel that way, but you wouldn't have known that from that
You
forum.
would not have known from
Why
that forum.
do these folks continue to pander to that viewpoint, to that attitude?
I think they believe the stuff they're saying.
Even Napoleon and Duggan, and they didn't believe some of the stuff
Right.
they were saying. They know, and I ran into Napoleon at lunch the next day after that. He knows, that you can't govern the way he was talking. So why do they have to campaign that way?
So do you think it really does break down to what you wrote in your column this week, that there's an old Detroit, new Detroit?
I don't know if I would. I don't think I would.
You can't put it in
divide
that
way.
easier
Yeah.
terms.
I mean, I think there are a significant number of people in Detroit who realize that we have been making poor decisions for a long time and are ready to do something different. Now,
Who's speaking to them in this campaign,
How
though?
disappointed are those people about Dave Bing? I think that's one of the problems, right? Dave Bing promised a lot of things that he couldn't deliver on, and so some of those voters are maybe now saying, this didn't work. I think Mike Duggan is trying to speak to those voters. He's trying to say, I am different.
Tuesday night,
He didn't
Steve.
Tuesday night, and I
that
think
was a disappointment.
and I think there's a legitimate question about how different Mike Duggan truly is. Mike Duggan is in some ways a throwback as well to old Wayne County politics,
That's right.
and I'm not sure who that candidate is in this race.
He
Well,
wasn't
but
on
maybe-
that stage Tuesday
Well,
night.
he wasn't on the stage Tuesday
And
Well,
night.
but
that
maybe
was what
we'll
was
start-
distressing to us, because leadership is going to be, political leadership has to get better in the city. It has to improve. Everybody is looking at bankruptcy and saying, oh, this is an opportunity for a new start, a new day in Detroit. We'll be better off coming out of it. We'll only be better off coming out of it if we pick better leaders. And there wasn't anyone on that stage Tuesday night who convinced me that they could take Detroit in a new direction after bankruptcy.
But I do want to say that and to be fair, there are some people on that stage who were not completely disappointing. There's some people on that stage who are good people with good heads on their shoulders. They may not be ready to be mayor, but someone like Fred Durhal, I've always been a big fan of Fred Durhal's. He's not crazy. He's not incompetent.
No, he was
Lisa
one of those
Howes.
saying voices.
Lisa Howes was a good state rep. She's been an
She
agitator
was
in this
dismal
race.
Tuesday.
She's done badly in this race.
And when she came
But
before us on the
hopefully-
editorial board,
yeah.
extraordinarily disappointing
Yes,
with her answers.
yes, and
she's
ours
not
too.
only not ready to be mayor, I'm not sure she's ready, to be anything.
But I
in
think-
terms
I
of
think
Well,
that's
but
somebody who
let's
needs
talk about
time.
this new generation, though.
Yeah.
Are some of those leaders, are we perhaps seeing them now in the city council race? Because that's what I want to shift to and talking about. We finally have the districts, and people are going to be voting at that for the first time. Are we starting to see some different leadership emerge there? And will you see that on city council then?
If they get elected, I think
Yeah.
there are some positive city council candidates out there. I mean, and the difference perhaps with some of them is they're not necessarily coming out of the union movement,
Yeah.
and they're not sort
That
of
makes it
beholden to
difficult.
the preachers. And if they can get elected, they can do well. But let's see if they can get elected.
Did you find it easier in your endorsement process to pick those people for city council?
I did not have, I'll say this, there was no district where I didn't feel like there was a qualified candidate for us to back. And in most districts, we found several who we had to sort of choose among, which is a good thing. I think ultimately what we're wondering is whether this will be an election like 4 years ago, which was a change election in Detroit, no question. Mayor and council all going in a different direction, or whether it will be like last year in the state house races in Detroit, where we saw a real move backwards, a retrograde kind of delegation elected that is in conflict with that change movement. And I guess it's really going to depend on who turns out on Tuesday as to which direction we go.
And it really is possible that we get a worse council than we had this time. And there's no guarantee we're going to improve ourselves.
All right, what about the results on Tuesday night? How long are we going to have to
Don't
wait
stay
for that?
up.
Don't stay up? Is it one of those things that's like, well, give me a call tomorrow and find
well,
out?
tomorrow
How
will
long
be
is that
lucky.
process going to take
It could take
for
a
mayor?
week. I mean, it could take a week. If there's a lot of absentee ballots, every single one of them has to be counted and looked at individually. They can't be, once they go through the scanner, the write-ins will be sorted out, and they've got to be one by one.
Yeah, and
Wayne
don't,
County Board of
And they'll-
Canvassers,
and
right?
don't count out.
No, Detroit Election Commission, right?
It would be Wayne County Board of Canvassers who go through the.
Go through the thing.
Go through
Okay.
the
I think
to
who
look
go
at the
through
signatures.
the ballots and figure out who gets what votes. But
But
also
they can be
don't count
challenged.
out legal Actually, there will be challenges to this question of this Mike Duggan versus this Mike Duggan, or however you say his name.
We didn't even get a chance to
That's going to be
discuss that. Do you think that's going to be a huge factor?
I think if I'm that other candidate, I try to claim as many of the ballots that say Mike Duggan as possible, because how do you know that those people weren't trying to vote for me and misspelled the name?
He won't do it. Whoever put him up to this will do it.
I think that's
and it'll be interesting to see who mounts the challenges based on that. But this, I mean, they'll be lucky if we can get a ballot printed in time for November, because I don't think this is going to be settled anytime soon.
Yeah, I think it's scary too. Also, that you've got people that have got to try to measure what people's intent were when they were writing down those names,
hard.
and that's going to be very, very difficult. All right, so. It won't be a late night on Tuesday. It might be a late couple of days, so we'll see.
Go to bed.
You know what? If you want more information on the candidates running in the primary, go to our website, MiWeek.org. We have information and interviews with all of the candidates through Detroit Public TV's My Vote initiative, so you can make an informed decision on Tuesday.